On the road. Hi, everybody, and welcome to our June virtual tasting. Thank you all for joining us. We are very excited. I am very excited to have Ian Brand from iBrand and Family with us today. He is the iBrand, if you could not put that together, but it was pretty easy to put together. Allison will not be joining us this month. She is right now, hopefully sleeping rather drunkenly up in Abruzzo, Italy. As part of a big trade tasting. She really wanted to join us, but unfortunately, it being what I think about 3:34 in the morning there, probably not the best use of her time. So anyway, I am here with Ian, and of course, we've got all you. As you all know, you're all experts before. If you have any questions for Ian, I'm going to mute everybody. So Ian, you'll just need to unmute yourself as soon as I do that, which I have now done. So if you have any questions for Ian, please throw them into the chat and I will be happy to ask them over the course of our conversation. And of course, we love hearing what your food pairings are, what your thoughts on the wine are. So please throw those into the chat. We'll make this as interactive as possible. Okay, Ian, I always start these conversations by asking the most important question, which is, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you've ever opened?
I think for me, it was probably a 1979 Santa Cruz Mountain Vineyards Bates Ranch Cabernet.
Oh,
in 2009. And it's a bottle that in terms of the quality is on par with anything else I've ever tasted. And it was very kind of eye-opening in terms of looking at our region and the relative quality of it.
nice. It was a 79. When did you open that up?
2009.
Okay. All right. So you got
and sort of bringing home the idea that there are regions that are relatively higher quality than others, but especially in America or in the New World, the ones that have gotten attention are the ones that have the reputation for success, and that there's ample potential in other places if you know how to find it.
Absolutely. Like Salinas, which is where you're located in the Carmel Valley and all of Monterey County, which, leads to the question, how did you come to settle in that area? What is your winemaking journey? Kind of take us through the route for you to get to where you are today.
Yeah. I had kind of a non-traditional path, as many do, to coming to the wine business. It is in many ways a refuge for scoundrels and ne'er-do-wells.
Yep.
I hope I fall into the latter, not the former, but
you can also throw beggars in there. Hopefully you're not that, but you never know.
Beggars, scoundrels, and ne'er-do-wells, yeah. Begging for a taste of the Rhum Conti. I got out of college and just kind of worked with whatever I thought was interesting, bounced kind of all around the Western Hemisphere, and ended up in Santa Cruz and needed a job, and found a low-paying job at Bonnie Doon, and worked there for about a year and a half until the cellar crew, they usually ran off a lot of the white folks that tried to work in the cellar, but
right.
I've got a pretty good Espanol callejero and an attitude and a mouth on me, and they couldn't run me off, and so they got me a better job up in the mountains. And it was a project that John Alden was consulting on, and a lot's just having good mentors and good kind of entree into the business. I think if I had been in a less kind of adventurous or worked with mentors who are more who are less direct about the craft, I would have run from it. But I gained a real understanding from those mentors. And in 2008, I was getting 2007, 2008, getting into my 30s and needed to get serious about the world, and had to decide what I wanted to do with my career, and I'd already been in the wine business 5 or 6 years, and so it seemed like a pretty good thing to do.
Yeah. So is that when you launched your first label?
Yeah, so I was looking to go out on my own, and kind of, given I didn't have any money, and I'm not really like I'm sort of got a little a lone wolf attitude about the world. I didn't fit and couldn't really see myself being successful in like more known areas.
Mhm.
The Sonomas, the Napas, the Paso Robles, Santa Barbara to a degree at that point.
Right.
And so I was looking for places I thought had unrealized potential, and identify like Southern Oregon, identified the Sierra foothills,
Mhm.
Mendocino, and Monterey. The Sierra foothills are too goddamn hot.
Right.
I could not live up there. Southern Oregon was very remote, and there wasn't enough in the ground. It's still very interesting to me,
Mhm.
although I worry about forest fires up there now,
Yeah.
as with the Sierra foothills. Mendocino was the coastal access. I really like having access to the coast. And
Mhm.
in Monterey, you had a lot of vines in the ground. You had good coastal access, and just kind of philosophically, like you look at the coast of California, Santa Barbara is a known region. So the Santa Maria area is coming up.
Right. Yeah.
Paso Robles is well known. Monterey is kind of a dark space.
Mhm.
Santa Cruz Mountains is well known. Sonoma is well known. Like it's this giant dark space sitting in the middle. And I was thinking, well, what's wrong with that place? Why isn't that happening? And kind of dug into it, and it had a lot more to do with what wines were being made and how they're being presented,
Mhm.
and expectations of the region rather than the bones. And so that seemed like a viable project, an interesting project, a project where I could have an effect in the local region. And Salinas seemed like a community that needed, needed a champion, needed what I was going to bring to the community. So that all kind of lined up for me.
Yeah, it feels like during that early 2000s time, kind of between 2000 2010, Monterey County was dominated by, several massive players. You think Hahn, you think Scheid. Was there a lot of, craft wineries, or was it just really these big guys kind of coming in, doing bulk wines from Monterey fruit, and nobody doing the smaller things?
Well, it's still more than half the fruit ships out.
Mhm.
And it was at a time where the large players were more dominant, I think, than they are now, though they're still quite dominant.
Right.
And they were chasing that 2000s idea of wine, which was a very like Parker score oriented, sort of the era that made Paso Robles, and Paso Robles is still kind of dealing with today.
Right.
And the reason why like Paso Robles exploded and Monterey didn't is one, you kind of had that west side and the size of ranches, and two, Paso Robles does that style well.
Yeah.
Monterey does not.
Right.
So when in winemaking, when you're trying to do something other than putting your best foot forward, it's sort of like getting dressed. If you're wearing clothes that don't fit you, you don't look good.
Mhm.
And so with wine, Monterey was making a bunch of wines, and still is in many ways, that don't fit the ground. And so like one of our biggest changes was to throw all that out the window and begin making wines that we thought really suited the place. And that's kind of been the foundation of our success.
Nice. So what was being grown in Monterey primarily, and then what are you trying to get planted in the area that you think is better suited for the climate and the zone temperatures?
So Monterey is like 46,000 acres of grapes.
Right.
And we work out of Monterey, San Benito, and Santa Clara, Santa Cruz counties.
Yeah.
But Monterey specifically is probably, in terms of the acreage, 3/4 of the acreage in those 4 counties. 16,000 of those acres are Chardonnay.
Mhm.
9,000 acres are Pinot. And, then you have Cabernet Sauvignon Blanc, and then a whole series of smaller varieties. There's 30 some varieties grown in Monterey. Chardonnay is a great match for Monterey. However, it's the Chardonnay that Monterey produces is not California style Chardonnay. California style Chardonnay, the Rombauers, the Franc families, it's Chardonnay based on Chardonnay grown in Napa, which is not a great place for Chardonnay. And so it's Chardonnay based on being very like big and blousy and oaky, which, are tools you employ when you've got grapes that maybe don't hold up. Right. And so even now the market's still kind of shifting, but what I found for years and years and years is that, so like I looked at the Chardonnays and I wasn't into the how they presented, and I thought that they weren't capturing the vineyard. I started adapting my Chardonnay production, and came to discover we could do a very like Chablisian style Chardonnay at a quality level where our Chardonnays are half the price of like similar quality Chablis. Which okay, that's I thought that was a neat trick. And you take that out and you bring it out and you show it to sommeliers across the country. Think I'm going to make 10,000 cases of Chardonnay. This is great. And they look at it and they go, I love this one. This is fantastic. Your pricing's great. I have 2 Chardonnay spots. I have a French Chardonnay spot for ones that taste like yours, and I have a California Chardonnay spot for something that is oaky and blousy.
Right.
And you're like, well, you're sitting there decrying the lack of terroir in California wines, and then I make a wine of terroir and you tell me to kick rocks.
Yeah.
And it's it's only been, especially since like the tariffs and since the cost of importing has gone through the roof, that all of a sudden we can't keep Chardonnay in stock. Mm-hmm. But it really took that kick in the pants to kind of break that dam where they were pouring something of lesser quality because of perception. Yeah. So that's one side. It's kind of shows how the market forces push things. But if I was especially looking at a Salinas Valley, which is where most of the grapes are in Monterey County, the Salinas Valley is the greatest white wine growing ground on the West Coast. We can produce things at a price and a quality which is essentially untouchable anywhere else. And if you guys have the Albarino in your glass, to me that's a great example. But like our Chardonnay, our Sauvignon Blanc. There you go. Yeah, our Chardonnay, our Sauvignon Blancs, and even going into rarer white grapes like Falangina, like more Italian grapes, Vermentinos. On the right soil pockets and the right climatic pockets, of which there are many because of the coastal influence. This place does those great, and the reason is you've got rocky soils, you've got some calcareous soils, you have some diatomaceous schist, and you have some granite. You've got cold nights, so you preserve natural acidity. You've got winds, and so you have good saline flavor off the ocean. You have you keep your terpenes, your aromatic compounds. And so if you're creating wines based on minerality, acidity, salinity, and aromatics,
it's the place to be. It sounds like you can pretty much plant anything based on those different variables. You've got so many different options that depending on whether you need higher acidity, whether you need lower acidity, whether you need, higher aromatics, lower aromatics, you can really kind of dictate the soil to the individual planting.
Yeah. And so as Americans are becoming more open to and asking for more white wines, we're moving away from the age of pairing your Napa Cabernet with your oyster plate.
Right. Though there are still people who do that, and if you want to do that, it's a free country. You can do that. Well, kind of a free country.
So as that happens, my hope is that we see more and more of those things in the ground, because those to me are things that show the area best. And that's like our place where we can really compete well.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you still producing? I mean, what's your most produced varietal? Is it still Chardonnay, or is I
Yeah.
know the La Marea was one of your kind of early wines that you worked with. Has that become a bestseller for you?
Oh
Or
yeah, no. The issue with that is that Albarino block that I get is probably the best one in Monterey County, and potentially the best one in California, and it's not big enough. I take the whole thing, sitting somewhere in the realm of 1,500 cases a year of Albarino.
oh
And
wow,
I just, after 2 months of having on the market this year, I just pinged all my distributors saying, guys, last call. it's
yeah,
June. We're at Albarino. And
wow,
so, that's 2 months. I could probably make 6,000 cases of Albarino, which is just crazy. But
yeah.
the block isn't big enough. So Albarino Chardonnay, the Old Vine Cabernet we produce out of that we're going to taste later, San Benito County. Those are our three kind of largest production.
Actually, we have the Cab Franc, but not the Cabernet.
The
So
Paysan Cabernet. Oh yeah, the Pape. I'm sorry.
yeah, we've got the pop
Yes.
because
Okay. I
that's okay.
misremembered. Yeah.
I know
So,
your brain is fried. That's totally fine. I'm here to guide you through what we've got. You
yeah.
just have to answer the questions. I'll handle all the other stuff.
Okay.
Cool. So what attracted you to Albarino? As you mentioned, it wasn't a widely grown grape, especially when you started the project in 2008. This wasn't something that was on a lot of people's radar. So what attracted to you and made you think, this is something that I can grow, I can produce, I can sell to the people?
Well, so between 2008 and 2012, I wasn't really happy with the wines I was making.
Mhm.
And the reason is I didn't feel like they matched up or expressed the way that I wish they would. They were fairly good. A lot of California wines are fairly good, and I was sitting right in that range, making fairly good wines, but something was not lining up. And so I kind of took it back down to basics. And one of the things I came to is what we just spoke about. Like what are the factors that make the Salinas Valley interesting?
Mhm.
And then so I came to that salinity, acidity, minerality, yada yada. And then what are grapes or types of wines that are going to express that? Larry and Sandy, pour some wine now.
Yeah, you don't need our permission to pour the wine. You can always pour the wine whenever you want. But we are starting with the 2021 La Marea Albarino, which, as Ian just said, he's at last call or beyond at this point because it is a hot selling commodity, a hot patata.
And so I was looking for varieties that would be a foil for those types of ideas. And it's called every grower I knew and said, what do you got? And only ended up with about 4 blocks worth looking at. And this was the most interesting of the blocks. And it's a total sleeper. It's in between some like production Pinot and some production Chardonnay, about a half mile off of the 101 up on the bench near Greenfield. But it's on these calcareous shale soils, so kind of weathered Carmel stone.
Okay.
And I made about 4 tons in 2011 and blew it and ran it through Malik, and it was just like, oh man, I blew that one, and it sold out in a month. And I thought, crap, I better learn how to make Albarino, because apparently there's something here, and grew to the point where I was taking the whole block. And it's one of our calling cards as a wine. This is one of our most popular wines. It gets poured all kinds of Michelin star restaurants, and fools, all the sommeliers into thinking it's a Rio Spicious Albarino. But
Yeah.
It's not. I've been accused of being a liar several times.
That you're importing the stuff over, putting your own label on it.
Yeah, right. I'm calling it Monterey County. Yeah,
exactly. I will say that this and the Petit Petit Pop were the two wines that I was kind of introduced to you with, which I think it was the 12 vintage. So it was probably right after. It might have been part of that first vintage, or it might have been the second one when you finally learned how to make Albarino. But I remember it being a huge seller at my place, and it was one of the, at that point, I think I could count on one hand the number of domestic Albarinos that, as a retailer, I could find and get access to. So, as we were talking about at the beginning, Albarino is one of those amazing success stories in California. Certainly not at the level of a Chardonnay or Chenin Blanc, obviously, but you did not see this anywhere on any menus, come 2000, 2003, 2005. And now, as I said, I think it's probably, third or fourth in the white pecking order, at least here in Paso Robles. And I know there's quite a few producers in Monterey County. What do you attribute the growth of that? Is it just, it's an easy story to tell. I hate to say it's a pronounceable name for a lot of people. Sure. It's kind of an alternative to the oakier Chardonnays or the New Zealand style Sauvignon Blancs. What do you think?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. It has a lot of qualities of Sauvignon Blanc without some of the more offensive qualities of Sauvignon Blanc. It provides a nice foil to like the style of Chardonnay that's predominant in California. As Carrie says, it's food friendly. It's back porch friendly. It's just it's a great grape because it has that approachability, and made well, it has the complexity, that quiet complexity. And that's something that we're really seeking. And I found that to be a recipe that really works in wines, that you want people to be able to get to it, and then you want to keep them interested. I think the Albarino does that great. Going back to 04, 05, you kind of had maybe 3 or 4. You had like the Michael Havens project, which ended up not being on great soils for Albarino.
Right.
You had the Cambiata, which was Eric Lauman, which was good for a while. That ended up getting pretty ripe. It was like 14.5% alcohol. And sort of lost me there. But some of the earlier vintages, you saw the potential in the area.
I'm thinking of like the Verdad project down in Santa Barbara. That was kind of an offshoot of Coupe down there that was doing some Spanish stuff.
And the Verdad project was probably one of the better ones. And but I think what sets this one apart is twofold. One, the interaction of the sunshine and the winds and the cool nights. So we're picking 21.5 bricks, but we have this incredible like ripeness and verve to it. So high acid, high phenolic ripeness. And then coming off those calcareous soils, you guys can really get that texture of the calcium. So that there's just compared to stuff off of sandier soils or off of clay soils, like you have like this depth of texture and phenols in this wine that you don't have. I haven't found other Albarinos in California.
No, there's a leanness to this, which is nice because you get that kind of mineral flintiness like you would on a Spanish Riespicious Albarino. There's even a little bit of that briny note, which I'm surprised at, which is so telltale in a Spanish in a Riespicious Albarino. How do you think that's part of the soil? Is it the fact that you're close to that coastal influence?
I think it's the winds coming down the valley. It's the lack of summer rains that. In wines out of Monterey and San Benito counties, brininess is a constant. And one of the things that I've learned working here is how to play with that rather than how to play against that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And this one, it's easy. Like that brininess is one of the things that makes it so food friendly, really sets it off.
Absolutely. Yes, we're getting a nice dry finish, which goes well in many applications with an A. They're giving it an A, I think. That's good.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, no, it is a remarkably it's a wine that works in market diverse like situations.
Yeah.
It's always funny when we're involved in like food and wine festivals, and oftentimes they will choose the Albarino to pair with, you know, some chef's dish, and you go and you see what they're cooking. They're cooking stuff like with asparagus or seaweed or artichokes, which are notoriously all the hardest things to pair.
Yep.
This Albarino just takes it all like a champ.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, so many people think Albarino, given its proximity to the coast, seafood, especially raw seafood, peeling shrimp, oysters. But I could see this with like a nice creamy brie or a camembert, something that has a bit of that oilier consistency, that richness, because this has such a leanness and a nice, not overpowering, but a kind of steely acid that runs through it, that it can really pair well with more deep fried foods or richer foods, I would think.
Yep. It does both equally well.
Nice. So going back, you kind of mentioned that this is grown, the block that you pull from is grown on a bench above Greenfield. I don't know how many of our folks here have been to the Salinas Valley. It's a pretty wondrous area when you're driving through it, but kind of take us through the geography there and how it works. I know you've got the Santa Lucia Highlands there up against the mountains.
Sure.
Just kind of give us a primer on that area.
Sure. To answer Lynn and Mike's question, the first thing I look for when I'm buying a variety like this is flip it around and look at the alcohol level. And if it's much above 13, you know, much above 13.5, you're likely to be in someone making a style that doesn't necessarily suit the grape. But, you know, as with all wines, like having a wine shop where someone knows your palate, or someone like Chris picks them out for you, is a good place to start. What makes the Salinas Valley and Monterey County special? You know, Chris was talking about the Templeton Gap and like the supposed marine winds coming over the Templeton Gap. And that's a story that's common on the California coast. You have, you know, the Petaluma Wind Gap, you have the Hecker Pass Wind Gap, various nooks in the coastal ranges where the coastal air comes through and cools the region. Monterey, we don't have a wind gap, we have a goddamn tunnel. And the way that plays out is the Monterey Bay is the largest opening, the largest bay on the California coast, which is why Monterey was the capital of Mexican and Spanish California. The Monterey Bay is bisected by the deepest marine canyon on the West Coast. So there's a 10,000 foot deep marine canyon that comes through the bay. It's why the Monterey Bay is a marine sanctuary. The cold water upwells out of the marine canyon. You have it's high action cold water. You have plankton blooms, and you got all kinds of whales and dolphins and cetaceans, you know, hanging out.
It's a very active marine biosphere.
It is a very, yes. And then the Salinas Valley runs all the way down to Paso Robles. It gets insanely hot in Paso Robles. Hot air rises, and other cooler air fills, you know, that void the hot air left. And so we have a pretty much daily wind coming off the bay. Like, you know, usually in Salinas, we'll start off with some fog 5 days out of 7, which burns off by 9 or 11 o'clock. You got about 3 hours of really nice weather, and then the winds pick up, and by the afternoon, that fog is hauling in again. And so what that means for the grapes is that you don't get long hours of high heat, both to burn off acidity and to spike sugars. Additionally, when those winds pick up, it will often close the stomata on the grape, which can be difficult when you have red wine grapes in the winds, because that really retards the ripening of the skins. For white wine grapes, where you don't leave them on the skins particularly long, it's fantastic, which is just kind of falls into why I think this is such a great white wine region of the Salinas Valley in particular. Once you get, but because the weather comes essentially from one direction, as you get off into side canyons and behind geographic features, you can get very different kind of microclimates in which reds do thrive. And so you have to be careful where you get your reds from and which reds you take. I am, especially in the Salinas Valley area, I'm partial to reds that ripen more in mid-October.
Hmm.
Because that whole function with the winds kind of really slows down in mid-September.
Right.
And so you get like a really nice month of pretty great ripening weather to get those skins nice and nice and ripe and textured. And so you really are working mountains and pockets and canyons. And then as we are west of the San Andreas Fault, we're on the Pacific Plate, and it's an earthquake zone, and you got all kinds of weird geology, budding other parts of geology. So you're really looking for these pockets where you have the wine growing soils, you have the appropriate microclimate for the grapes that are planted. They're kind of catching the sun, the wind, and the weather in the right way. And then you're cooking with fire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an amazing geography there, because you have these incredibly steep Santa Lucia mountains up against the coast.
Yeah.
And there's only really, I mean, as the crow flies, like 10 miles or less, I would imagine, from the vineyards to the sea from that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got the pinnacles over there on the eastern side.
Yep.
So it is this natural wind tunnel where the wind comes kind of southeasterly down through there pretty much on a regular basis. And I imagine that the steepness of those mountains, because they're fairly steep, acts as a really nice rain shadow that kind of limits the amount of precipitation coming off of the Pacific, especially during the what are supposed to be the wetter months.
Yeah. Typically it's been a little dry the last couple of years. Particularly what happens is the Big Sur coast will see 50 to 80 inches of rain in a winter, and you'll see 10 to 16 in the valley. But because the Salinas River drains the backside of the coastal mountains, we get all that water coming down through the valley. And that's,
so you've got a nice water table down there for the roots to get down to.
Most years.
Yeah. Of course. Yes, it's a new paradigm that we are shifting into. Before we move on to the next wine, I have to ask, you're making about 1,500 cases of this based on the one block you've got.
Yeah.
Have you talked to the owner of that about planting more Albarino in the area? Have you looked at other vineyards to maybe expand the production given its popularity?
Yes, and I'm looking at taking a planning contract on a nearby block.
Okay. All right.
It's a serious 15-year commitment.
Right.
But
you heard it here first.
Yeah, but I think it's time to do it, because we've been making this wine for 11 years and it doesn't stop.
Yeah.
It's really a lesson for us. So,
I mean, I know you are generally considered among those in the know in California to be one of the preeminent Albarino producers in the region, if not the preeminent Albarino producer in the state. Mike and Lynn want to know what is depicted on the label, and where does the La Marea name come from?
So the label is a wood cutting from the 16th century that my buddy took and put some color into. And La Marea means the tide, and it's both a reference to the influence of the ocean on the weather, the influence of the ocean, these calcareous shales, they're old sea soils, sea sediments, and then also kind of the pendular swings of trying to find something true or constant in and among the pendular swings of fashion and wine. And so that search for something classic and timeless.
Nice. So is it a Spanish woodcutting? Is this a depiction of a Spanish town? Is it like de Compostela or one of those?
I have no idea which town it is, but yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I wasn't around then. I don't know.
I think just tell people it's Santiago de Compostela just to add to the mythos of Galicia.
There's maybe so much like playing fast and loose with facts in the wine business that I actually choose not to participate in that.
You're a better man than I am, but we appreciate that. So we'll move on from, what was once lost and then became kind of an up and coming grape, the Albarino, to something completely different, completely rare, not only here in the United States, but really rare around the world. Your Brandon family 2020 Melon de Bourgogne. Now,
Sure.
this is a grape that most people are not at all familiar with. Even in France, it's produced under an entirely different name. It's the component of the Muscadet wines grown around the town of Nantes on the far western Atlantic coast, northwestern Atlantic coast of France. How on earth did you stumble across this varietal and decide that this is something you wanted to produce?
Okay, so the Melon got into Chalon because they were given some cuttings, and it was planted up there and thought it was Pinot Blanc. And they still call it Pinot Blanc in Chalon. And in the 70s, a UC Davis ampelographer was coming through, and they looked at the leaves and said, "This is not Pinot Blanc." And it was a field blend that was 90-some% Melon, and there was some Auxerrois and some other stuff in there. And so those cuttings were also distributed up to Oregon in the 60s. So you have some Melon up in the Willamette Valley.
Yep.
And so it's a story and something that I guess you could say it's traditional to Chalon. I mean, it's 70 years. I don't know how traditional that makes it, but it's what we've got for history. And so it was interesting to me to make it. This is a small block on the last piece of ground owned up there by the Graff family, who started the Chalon winery. And in making it, it's such a different terroir from Muscadet, that I felt trying to emulate or trying to touch on Muscadet would be silly. So what we've been doing with it is we've been running skin contact on it and then barrel fermenting it. So that gets 5 days of skin contact and then 6 months on lees and barrel.
Okay.
And so it's a much kind of more textured, it comes in early. It's our first pick by, solid week to 10 days. And then we'll leave it on skins for 5 days and then press it off.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I have only seen Melon grown up in, the far Pacific Northwest, like Puget Sound area. And then, like you said, you'll see, maybe one or two producers who don't label it as Pinot Blanc in Oregon. So how do you think the California version of this, because, Chalon, it is cool, but it is a much higher elevation than those other places.
I don't know that I'd say it's cool. It's a very Paso Robles style climate.
Okay. That's interesting. I always think of Chalon as like, Pinot capital, like super high elevation and whatnot.
It's a Pinot capital. It's becoming less so because it is getting warmer.
Okay.
We've been getting substantially warmer since the 60s in California, partially because of climate change, partially because of the Pacific decadal flow. Which is a whole different arcana that we can get into if you guys really want to get nerdy.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's drop in. I'll put it in layman's terms, but we can go there.
No, it's ocean currents, and because the coast is cooled by the cold ocean, the colder the ocean is, the cooler it is here. It's the same reason why El Nino and La Nina years are so very different in terms of the weather that comes through. But what has made Chalon is the soils. Oftentimes in the discussion of cool climate wine growing and California wines in general, what is lost is the significance of the soils and the quality of wine. It's one of the reasons the west side of Paso has been so successful, is there's great wine growing soils, especially for like your muscular reds. Out there. And one of the reasons why a lot of California wines have a lot of, as they say, macchiato. As John Kongsgaard has very famously said, or it was Dave Ramey who said that I've never seen a over-oaked wine. I've only seen an underwined barrel. and I wouldn't say necessarily agree with that per se, but the more strength you have in the soil in the wine, the more verve, the more you can do with that. So Chalon is one of the few places where you have true limestone in California.
Mm-hmm.
It's that limestone that has, allowed Chalon wines to age and do such beautiful things and has such incredible textures. And so that's really what you're working with is those limestone soils in order to get the quality up there.
Yes, as we learned a couple of tastings ago, the limestone soil tends to be reductive for the acid and keep it kind of in check, which is nice.
Yes, that's one facet. The other facet is calcium is the main building block for a lot of the grapes' natural defenses. Mm-hmm. So grapes from limestone soils tend to have less mildew issues and thicker skins on the grapes. And so you have more phenolics with thicker skins.
Interesting. So Carrie asks, what led you to doing 5 days of skin contact with these Melon de Bourgogne grapes?
I mean, what the hell do you do with Melon and Chalon?
Right.
And so I've gotten to the size where I can mess around with shit. And this is maybe a ton and a half every year. It's kind of a blip in our production schedule. And so I get to follow my nose. And I start up at 3 days because that was what Scott Schultz at Joy Lade did with his. And then I started moving to picking a lot earlier and increasing the amount of skin contact. And I've been happy. And now that I've had a few years of doing it like that, I think I might actually go longer.
Interesting. How much longer are you thinking?
I mean, I don't know. It depends how drunk I am and how saucy I'm feeling. But
I guess how lazy if you just can't quite get to the taste, can't quite get to the production facility that day. Maybe.
Oh no. I mean that with the amount we produce, that I have a full staff and we're there 7 days a week, so there's no laziness involved. Yeah.
Good for you.
Yeah,
that's true. I did not mean that to be pejorative. I just meant.
Oh, I took it as such. And yeah.
That's fair. All right. Well, it's been a pleasure having you. In case you decide to storm off, I appreciate
no,
it.
I am a New Englander by birth. There's no lazy involved.
Excellent. Yeah, this is a stunning wine. Now, how long have you been making this wine? Is this something that you do year in and year out, and you have been? Is this something new for you? Is it something that you only get certain year vintages?
I had made it for the Graff family for a few years, and then in 18 they decided that was their last year producing it, and so because I had made it much more in the style that was pioneered by Graff at Chalon, and tried to emulate his production methods for them. And when they decided they don't want to produce anymore, I was comfortable with the vineyard and I knew it well, and I had some ideas of where I wanted to go. And so I did 19 and 20, and it will be a constant for us. It's a wine that really has, that I think people enjoy and has some traction. And for us, I mean, as you know, I had to put these cases aside for you, because if we make something interesting between our network and the tasting room, we'll eat 100 cases without even blinking an eye. So that gives me a real freedom in the winery to kind of stretch my legs.
Yeah, David, to answer your question, we started with the Marea Albarino, and we're actually on the Graff Vineyard Melon de Bourgogne right now. But what you just said, Ian, brings up a good question, which is, there does seem to be more interest these days in people expanding their palates, trying something different, more unusual. Have you been seeing that? And is that translating into the different varietals and grapes that you're being offered? Or are you starting to see, because there's still a lot of people who will tear up lesser known varietals or things, aren't producing or aren't generating revenue. They'll tear it up and plant Cab or Merlot or Chardonnay or whatever it is.
Well, you're seeing much more, you're much more like Merlot pulled out. This trend has been going on for about 10 years. And trends in wine kind of follow economic cycles.
Yeah.
And I think we're all feeling that we're sort of reaching the end of like this economic cycle. There's some shakiness out there, and with this pursuit of non-traditional varieties, it's gotten to a place where it's a little bit crazy, and it has come, 5-7 years ago, like something like that would be in a vineyard, and I'd be the only one that was really kind of into it.
Right.
And then you had some people like Ryan Sturm, and some of the producers out of like southern Santa Cruz County come around, and they were into it. And I was like, great, you guys are wonderful people. I'm really happy to be sharing this with you, and happy to see what you do with it. And then now it's like every assistant winemaker from Paso and Berkeley and Sonoma is down here bidding up the price of young vine Carignan.
Right.
And so these growers have this idea that their young vine Carignan's worth $3,000 a ton. You're like,
yeah.
Old vine Carignan's not worth $3,000 a ton. What's going on here? And you just kind of are watching the trend jump the shark.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened with Pinot 10 years ago. And it's happening in this trend now, but the benefit is with each of these trends, you have this proliferation.
Right.
And as that trend kind of implodes, the less successful plantings, less successful labels, they kind of go the way of the dodo.
Sure.
And you're left with the ones that actually work. And so it is ultimately for the betterment of the area, the betterment of California wine.
Yeah.
And it's been fun to watch. You do see a lot of weird stuff out there where it's weird for the sake of being weird. Mm-hmm. And there isn't much of an other underpinning of like real thought behind it, other than I want to make something that my neighbor doesn't have. And I go, okay, well, maybe there's a reason your neighbor doesn't have it. But
right. I mean, the contraction of the market makes sense, but do you fear that contraction could lead to, the decimation or, complete disappearance of that block to be planted for something that's more capital intensive?
I mean, like I said, so once a block is in place, there's very strong economic forces keeping it there. Mm-hmm. That someone's invested in that block, and so there has to be like real reasons for that to be grafted over or replanted or pulled out. From my perspective, like we've been through some economic cycles that were very
2008, 2009.
Yeah. So I'm fairly certain that anything that I want to keep, I'll be able to keep in the ground.
Yeah.
And interested to see kind of who makes it and what the result is of a shift of the winds. When the tide goes out, you find out like who's not wearing any clothes, right?
Right. It's kind of like art or NFTs. It's, it has value as long as there's at least one person out there who's willing to pay money for it. So,
and we'll see which of the natural winemakers are naturalists.
Right. I guess two people, because you have to have one that owns it and then the other one who's willing to pay for it. But
there you go.
Yeah. That will be interesting. So, yeah, I'm fascinated with this wine simply because it is so unusual. How many cases of this are you producing?
Somewhere between 80 and 100 a year.
Okay, so it's super, super small. Is it going mainly to your wine club members or?
So usually with these smaller production wines, it'll go out to our wine club. It'll see the tasting room for a couple months, and we'll show it there. Some of our more adventurous distributors, or there's certain wine shops in California that are, we don't show them. It's just people know that we have it, and they're like, hey, you got that again? Okay, yep. Great, got 6 cases for you. And then it's gone. It's really great to be in a position where I can do stuff like that, and I don't have to the idea of spending a lot of time trying to sell a 100 case lot of wine is just doesn't seem like, a
Right.
good use of anyone's time.
Yeah.
But to have like the reputation, the structure, to be able to make interesting stuff like this, and kind of, wine is this incredibly slow moving world.
Mhm.
And so you put these threads out there in the world, and oftentimes you can be surprised like what the result is 10 years down the line.
Yeah, it's kind of the hockey stick graph, because it's got the slow, 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 and then all of a sudden it will accelerate if you get one article or one score, or somebody gets a hold of it and decides to write about and spread the word.
Yeah. And so I mean it's fun to make. I really like being able to explore these very interesting regions through different lenses, and Melon is a very strange lens to look at Chelone through.
It absolutely is. And again, you can probably count on one hand and still have a thumb left over the amount of people producing this in California, I would imagine. So
Yep.
other than, the new up and comers that are trying to outbid you for your lot. So screw those guys.
There's only I think 2 or 3 blocks. There's maybe an effective 1.5 acres of Melon that you can buy in Chelone, and I have half of it.
Nice.
And
is there a 21 vintage that's ready or coming in the future?
Ready? Just got bottled and labeled.
Okay.
I think it's coming out in the fall.
Okay, perfect. Yep. I'll have to keep that in mind, because I know we've already had some requests for it. So we'll have to tell people that there's a delay on those, but it will eventually hit their market.
So you guys understand, Chris came and tasted this and said, I want this. And I had to hide the 4 cases in like a back office because it was popular at that point at our tasting and everywhere else.
And I appreciate that. And I don't even know where the spare, 49th, the mythical 49th bottle appeared from, but somehow it emerged like Excalibur from the lake. So it's fine. So last but not least, again, normally when you think Melon de Bourgogne, you think Muscadet, you're thinking seafood, you're thinking oysters, especially, North Atlantic, cool weather. But as you mentioned, this is a completely different environment, skin contact, completely different production. So in terms of food pairings, what would you suggest with a wine like this?
I mean, I'd probably go something that's very traditional to this area, which would be like a petrale sole, lightly breaded in butter. As being a really great pairing for this, little lemon over the top, and you'd be right in line.
Yeah, it's such a delicate wine that it feels like it needs a delicate food almost. This would be one I could see definitely pairing with some vegetables, like some nice bitter greens, or like sauteed eggplant or something like that. Just very light and easy, no overpowering flavors that are gonna compromise the flavor of the wine, but definitely not asparagus or artichokes or seaweed with this
one. Not with this wine. Yeah,
no, not at all. Excellent. Cool. Let's move on to the reds, and we'll start with the Le Petit Paysan, Le Petit Pape. And this is a fun this was basically kind of like a second label that you created. And what was the purpose of launching it? Maybe it was a first label. I don't know.
I wouldn't say second label. The purpose of launching it was, at the time, and it's still true to a degree now, is you had this giant bifurcation of California wine. You had your grocery store wines, which are unmitigated garbage. And then you had your aspirational wines, which are hugely varied in quality.
Right.
And what I was drinking a lot of would be your village wines, kind of your secondary appellations. At the time, Gigondas is now $50 a bottle, but at the time, like a good Gigondas was $25 a bottle.
Yeah. Or Beaujolais Cru or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, the thought was like, why isn't this produced in America? And one thing I saw in this region was access to a lot of grapes kind of in the price point, which would allow for the production of wine from that price point. In the last 3 years, it's gotten very difficult to kind of hold on to blocks at the price point we need in order to make those wines. It's a different story. But that's just the way of the world, and you have to adjust to it. And so the idea was to make a wine that was, very straightforward, very true to the place, very food friendly, that functioned the way that your village appellations would in the old world. And the Petit Paysan name, it's an idiomatic expression referring to like the uneducated masses in the country. And it was sort of a tongue-in-cheek take on how very, I don't know the word you want to use. There's just, the attitude in the wine world where everything has to be like shiny and, luxury.
Snooty
Yeah.
and sophisticated. Yes.
Yeah. And what, the wines that most people want are the ones that drink really nicely, and you can drink them on a Tuesday night with your spouse over a fairly simple, fairly fresh dish. And what I found is like, that's the backbone of what we do as a business. Is probably 80% of what we produce are the Paysan wines. Because that's, they're just super utilitarian, really high quality wines for your everyday. The kind of wines you don't mind opening a weeknight, or if your friends that maybe drink a little bit too much come over, and if you burn 3 bottles, you're not that upset about it. And there's honestly made from good places and well blended, and we've got them kind of on a lock right now.
Nice. Yeah, we like to call it the second bottle wines. So you open the good stuff for the first bottle, and then you've got a good quality but less expensive second bottle ready to go.
And what I have found in our wines is we're not lower quality. We're just less bullshit.
Yeah.
I'm not someone who enjoys spending a ton of time like fluffing the customer. And so what you don't get in our pricing is the extra, 40% of making you feel like you're a real baller.
Right, exactly. Telling them that there's only 200 cases of this, and you get a fancy wooden box when you buy fewer 6 bottles or whatnot.
You're not going to get that here.
Nice. Have you considered, letting people bring their own vessels, their gallon jugs and whatnot, like they do in France, to show up at the winery and just fill them up?
I have. We're busy though, and so we try to keep our door shut, and so keep the workflow going.
There, I also imagine that ABC would not look too kindly upon something like that.
No, you can do that. That's legal, but
interesting. Nice. So this one is a Rhone. You also mentioned that you're doing an old vine Cabernet with this. How are you deciding, which varieties, which wines to make under the Petit Paysan label?
It really, every wine we make, no matter which label it's under, is based on something I see in the ground. I might see somebody else's wine, I'll see a thread in that, or I'll be looking at a vineyard block and, trying to conceive of what I can do with that. And so they all start at the conceptual level. I don't decide that I want to make a Cabernet and go find Cabernet. I'm looking at a block of Cabernet being like, someone needs to make this. And if not me, then who? So that's the genesis of it. And then once you kind of have that raw material, it's just a process of cycling through styles and iterations to find the one that matches that place best. And so I'm very agnostic in terms of varieties and style. It is all about, your best expressions are the most simple, the most linear connection of like flavors from ground to grape to bottle to glass. And so if you're doing things in that way, you don't have to get involved in a bunch of weird additives and a whole ton of oak and, weird dances and engraved boxes and all kinds of crap like that. You just kind of
silk screened bottles and the like.
Yeah.
Wax coverings, which we'll get to with the next wine, because it's a bit of a pet peeve of mine. But
okay.
Or latex, but that's okay. But at the same time, I imagine, you're certainly, there are economic considerations that go in where, you have to be able to, you're trying to find that balance between, vineyards that are producing grapes of a quality that, meets your expectation, but at the same time can be had for a price that allows you to put them into a wine like this and price it at the price it goes for.
Yes. And so it's kind of twofold. One is you have to find stuff off the beaten path, which it means part of what we were discussing earlier is the path around here has gotten more beaten in the last 5 years, dramatically more so.
I feel like that's just about everywhere in California. Even, your aforementioned Sierra foothills and whatnot have probably seen their grape prices shoot up, double the triple from what they were at some point.
Absolutely. And the second piece is that they're blends of vineyards and varieties, usually because maybe each block, maybe they're not as farmed as precisely, so they need a little bit more variant year to year, or they're maybe a lot more one note. If I'm looking for something, I'm going to do a single vineyard, single variety wine. I want to have depth and complexity in that, in that vineyard, in that variety. But if there's, for instance, there's this Syrah vineyard that goes into the Petit Pape that, does black olive, and that's what it does. And so, by itself, it's like, oh, black olive, great. But in that mix at like 15% of that mix, that note really that brininess sets off a whole bunch of other things. So you learn how to piece these things together in order to use the best of like what each block is giving you.
Yeah, I imagine it could be a tough sell even at a lower price point to sell a briny black olive Syrah.
I see people selling grapes picked right next to like stuff that I put in our $19 rosé for $45 a bottle. And I feel like, do you guys not respect your customers? What's going on here? Do you not know better? I don't but that happens all the time, and you really got to be careful.
I can't attribute the source to it, but I know that it was once said that you'll never go broke underestimating the American public.
P.T. Barnum.
I thought that's who I thought it was, but that just seems like such an obvious answer that it makes it. I figured it was somebody else, but you're probably right. It probably is P.T. Barnum. But let's talk a little bit because again, the Le Petit Pape is one that you've been making, since again you came on my radar, which was back in 2012, 2013. So this has been a pretty consistent wine under the Petit Paysan label to do the Petit Pape.
Yeah, it's a very different iteration of the Rhone blend than you get down in Paso Robles. I think that Grenache-based wines are an excellent match for the Central Coast in many ways. And
why is that?
The relative dryness of the summertime. They're very drought tolerant. Land values here. Grenache is a liberal producer, so you can produce quality at greater volumes. So when you're looking at producing something, in the price range of this, you can't, pretty much every Pinot Noir under $30 is going to be trash.
Right.
Because
and probably it's 24.999% Grenache or Petit Syrah or something else.
And the reason is Pinot Noir is not a liver producing grape. And so in order to get up, everything in wine comes back down to either materials or sales teams. You're paying for something.
Right.
And so, at some point it comes down to amount of grapes per linear foot of of vineyard. And in order to get into those price points, you have to produce somewhere north of 4 tons an acre. Pinot Noir at 4 tons an acre, you're really pushing to get to 4 tons an acre.
Yeah.
Grenache at 4 tons an acre, you're cutting off half the crop.
Right. It's a very vigorous vine.
Yeah. And so, you can really get, I have Grenache vineyards that go into that, some years, in a good year, you'll be getting 6 tons an acre. And oftentimes those are the best years from that vineyard. And so it's just the right base point. And it has that kind of, you get if you produce it right, which means a lot of whole cluster. You can't stem your Grenache because all you get is like strawberry wine. So you have a lot of whole cluster in there, and then you have to blend on top of it because 95% of Grenache vineyards produce a very simple, straightforward wine. So ours are usually 50-ish% Grenache, and then you bring in the Morvet, you bring the Syrah, you bring in the Cinsault or the Counoise or whatever else you're putting in there to accentuate other points to round out the wine.
Got it. This one is 37% Grenache, and then you have 33. Yeah. So I imagine this is this is probably a vintage that was on the lower side of Grenache.
Yeah. In 19, Grenache didn't, and we're seeing it again in 22. Like Grenache is not wanting to set fruit this year. It's going to be a light Grenache year.
Is there a reason for that? Was it late frost, or was it just
this year? I think it's the winds during flowering. Grenache is famous for shattering. Yeah.
Interesting. So how do you make up the blend? Obviously, you want to keep this very Rhone oriented. You use, I imagine, the Cinsault, the Carignan, the Counoise, as you mentioned, more as just almost topping wine, smaller percentages, or do you ever increase the percentage of those? Do they add things to the wine?
Well, we always start with, so every wine that comes into the winery is slated for something. And we start, we have a myriad Rhone wines, and then we'll kind of break down based on the quality of the year and where different things are going. And for the Petit Pape, the first thing that we always try is the very romantically named cellar dump, which is where you take everything else that's in the cellar that's in that Rhone kind of umbrella and put it together and see how it is. And hopefully it's good. And if it is, you won that year, you get the big prize. And if it isn't, then you have to kind of identify which lots are kind of dragging it down, or how to adjust percentages to get to a wine that you're happy with. That's just kind of the process of going at it. But your hope is that you run a very efficient winery where you don't have anything that is like, dragging down the process.
So at what point are you making those decisions? Is it, when the grapes are still growing, when they're in the vineyard, when you're out there tasting them, or is it, when they arrive?
When you most of our vineyards are long-term contracts. So we have an idea of what we're making out of every vineyard. I only have so much headspace. I'm only bringing a certain number of new things every year. Right. And then you run through the fermentation process, and sometime around March, you start figuring out what the hell you did. And at that point, you start getting some ideas, and we'll be blending Rhone wines. I'm already working my spreadsheets right now. And so you kind of work your spreadsheet. You have your sales channels, you have the wines you want to make, you have the raw material in the cellar, then you got to make it all match up. It's it's a little puzzle.
Yes. What happens with the excess? Because sometimes you have that one little piece, it's like assembling an IKEA bookshelf, and there's like 3 pieces that are left over and you don't know what to do with them.
Yeah. Usually the bulk market, just get it out, sell it to somebody else.
Interesting.
There's a series of small wineries that will often, if I've got a few barrels, will buy them off of me, or you just got to find a place for it and move it out and get on the next year.
Always find a buyer for whatever's left over.
Yeah, I mean, I am very, I saw that someone said they've liked every wine so far, and
Yes.
for me that's partially being stringent about what goes in the bottle, and so if it's not something I'm proud of selling, we don't put it in the bottle.
Yeah,
Pretty easy.
absolutely. Have you had wines that you have just refused to sell, vintages where you've said, I'm not putting this out there?
I've never made any mistakes.
You are perfect. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I've skipped vintages on stuff for sure. And, you get distributors calling me like, where is that? And it was just, well, it wasn't there that year.
Mhm.
And so, we're just not going to do it.
Yes, David Funder never made mistakes either. You guys are elite company.
Yep.
You guys and Helen Mirren never made a mistake. So under the Petit Paysan, we mentioned obviously the Petit Pape. You've got the old vine cab that you mentioned. What other wines are you doing under this? And what's sort of the threshold? How many wines? Or is it something you're looking to expand? Or are you kind of keeping it the same size?
So right now it's a Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Rosé, Pape, and Cabernet, and then we do a small amount of Petit Syrah that we brought back because we stopped making it, and we got so many requests in the tasting room that we're going to bring it back. But that's only about 150 cases.
Got it.
I mean, as with everything, I don't operate from a plan of wines I want to make.
Mhm.
I will edit myself from things that I'm interested in making because it's not worth the time to chase my tail trying to sell it.
Mhm.
But everything that we do make is based on what's there, what's interesting, what does well. That it's, it is all kind of based in the ground. And if I find something that I think is worthwhile to bring to market, I'll make it and bring it to market. But I feel very strongly about not filling the world with, purposeless stuff.
Supermarket wines, not another supermarket wine.
Well, sure. Or just like a wine that doesn't have that has no interest or place where it's useful. You see so many of those out in the world, and you're just like, what are we doing here?
So what is the purpose of this
one? The Petit Pape?
Yeah.
The Petit Pape is just a wonderful, light, go everywhere, do everything red that, over delivers for quality. It pairs really well with everything, pizzas, barbecue steaks, vegetarian dishes, heavier fish dishes. It's just, I find with a lot of local customers and our wine club customers, this is the one that they're coming in between shipments and buying 6 or 12 bottles because they're going through it at their house because it's just like it delivers day in and day out, and it's very accommodating to all kinds of different moments and foods.
Yeah, it's that Tuesday night wine / second bottle wine.
Sure.
Nice. Yeah. And I think what's great is you can throw a little bit of a chill on this one and not lose anything with it. Is that, by design, are you kind of intentionally pulling the grapes to have a little bit more of that acidity? I imagine you're doing this in either neutral oak or some stainless steel or whatnot to kind of maintain that freshness to the wine.
It's these neutral oak and cement. Okay. And yeah, it's, I just Grenache based wines in general, the way we make them on the coast because we're cooler, are going to have that chillability. Yeah,
chillability. I like it.
Yeah,
I feel like that should be if you had a Salinas Valley Wine Growers Association, chillability would be the perfect motto for you guys.
There you go.
All right, perfect. Let's move on to our last wine, which is the Ibrand and Family 2019 Bates Ranch Cab Franc. So Ibrand and Family, kind of I mean, I don't remember you having the Ibrand and Family when I first started buying from you. This is kind of is it more the umbrella for everything, or is this sort of the top end of your wines?
So the answer, we have some wax questions, And
Yes.
what purpose does the wax serve? Yeah, just to annoy people. It looks pretty, makes you upset.
And it does. You've accomplished your mission with it.
It's not difficult. You just throw the corkscrew through and you pull it right through the wax.
Yes, and then you get the weird like claw of wax that's sticking over that affects the flow of your wine.
I don't know what technique you're using. I open 1,000 of bottles a year and I never have that issue. So there's different, you can do that. You can take, if you have a decent knife in your corkscrew, you can run a little score on it, and that works well. The wax is not difficult.
And this isn't actually wax, right? Is this more latex that you guys are using?
It's more like a plastic polymer. Yeah.
Okay.
The not great for corvins. Yeah, that's true. If you do take a sharper kitchen knife and score right across the top of the bottle, this will pop right off.
Yes. Sorry, Carrie, you're among the 0.0000001% that corvins your wines on a regular basis. So. Yeah. You lose.
Yeah, it's one of those things I started doing when it's a very small label, and I've threatened to stop doing it. And the chorus is, it's a lot of folks really like the aesthetic of it. So
well, and it's such a tiny dip. Like you're not doing the full, maker's mark down the neck type of thing. Yeah. It's just like a little, like just the tip, just for a second, just see how it feels, kind of thing.
Yeah. Just I was not going to bring that up, but okay.
Yeah. All right. I think there's only 4 or 5 people on the chat who picked that up, but that's okay. Looks pretty, but kind of pesky. Pesky is a good descriptor for wax and latex tops to the wine. But let's talk a little bit about the Bates Ranch, because this is a vineyard that you are not only intimately familiar with, but it's a source of some of your best wines.
Sure. The Bates Ranch is probably the least known of the classic Santa Cruz Mountain Bordeaux vineyards. Mm-hmm. It's in the southern Santa Cruz Mountains up Red Retreat Road, first planted in 1968. These vines were planted in 1978. They're dry farms and maybe about 2 acres of it. And one of the fruit allocations I hold most dear. It really makes an incredible Cabernet Franc. Unlike any Cabernet, we do another Cabernet Franc, which is very kind of Loire Valley influenced. Mm-hmm. This is unlike any other Cabernet Franc in the world, in my experience. And so we just make it as itself. Some of the most amazing things about it, I mean, what's the alcohol on the 19? I think it's like 12.7 or something.
Let's see, 12.2.
12.2.
Yeah, I mean, you've got that 1 point wiggle room or whatnot.
No, we're pretty precise.
Okay.
If it says 12.2, it's 12.2.
No.
Again, going back to that no BS.
Your truth in advertising.
Truth in advertising, yeah. And so, I mean, you can imagine it's the to have that level of body and texture in a wine that is, that low alcohol is really different for California. Usually when you're seeing stuff kind of at those alcohol levels, they're a little thin and eviscerated, and they're picked for agenda rather than for quality. Yeah. But this block, we've been doing it for 5-6 years now, and really kind of gotten a touch for it and know kind of when to grab it and nail it and how to treat it. And I really love that wine.
Yeah, it's a fascinating Cab Franc to me, because it has the lightness and the body of, like you were mentioning, a Loire style, that kind of very cool climate style Cab Franc, but it doesn't have those overpowering Parazine green notes, the vegetal note that you find on a lot of them. It has more of the Paso Robles late ripening, picked in October, early November style, where you can just let the fruit hang and eliminate those Parazines to bring out, more of the fruit rather than that green note.
Yeah, and that is more of I mean, this does come in generally early October, even at 21 and change bricks. Mm-hmm. But it's we've learned how to ferment Cab Franc. and it involves being gentle. It involves not getting high temperatures and really, using length of fermentation rather than heat for extraction.
That's interesting. I think you're the first person I've heard of talk really about the length of fermentation to sort of extend. Now, what are you extending if you keep the fermentation going longer?
Well, so you have enzymatic extraction, you have heat extraction, you have alcoholic extraction.
Right.
The enzymatic extraction, you break down the skins often by throwing pectic enzymes in. That's very common in terms of your more muscular California wines. It's a source of a lot of histamines in the wines.
Yep.
And that gets you kind of that plus oftentimes some residual sugar, which get you that goopiness. That with the heat of fermentation, it's a lot like steeping a tea or a coffee. So if you run it hotter, you're going to get a lot more tannins out. If you run it cooler, you're going to get a much more delicate extraction. And then with the alcoholic, you do get a little of we'll put about 10% stems in our Cab Franc fermentations. And so we'll get a little touch of green stemness from there, a little seed tannin, and then a much more kind of lithe expression from the skins and the fruit.
Interesting. So are you doing, tank fermentations with glycol to keep the temperature down? Or are you throwing dry ice in there? Or?
No, it's cold in Salinas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we have to,
I guess, if you're picking in late October.
No, it's early October, but even so, if we are, in October, you might see 80 degrees peak temperature, not even 72 during the day. And in the evening, you're down to 55. So we're actually having if it's a ton and a quarter, ton and a half fermentation, we're having to work to get temperatures up.
Okay.
So it's actually more work to try and get them up. And it's a very different environment than Napa or Paso, where in Paso, you're fermenting in half-ton bins because anything more, you're gonna cook.
Right.
We don't have that problem. I mean, I will sometimes have 10-ton fermentations where I have to throw the heater on to get up to temperature.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's such a, I have to shift my worldview because I always think of Salinas as more of a warm weather place, but clearly it is not. No, not at all. Do you worry about stuck fermentations? Are there certain yeasts that you find to use to facilitate the process?
Not yeast, but yeah, but by the end of the season, we're babying stuff, and certainly with restarts and stuck fermentations, especially a later year and a cooler year. Last year was cooler for us; wasn't cooler for everybody else. We had a lot more stuck fermentations last year because we were picking into November and it's 45 degrees at night, and so you get down the end of fermentation and things don't want to finish.
Right. Yeah. Are you shutting the door and running some heaters or whatnot around it?
Oh yeah, and tenting stuff, running heaters, doing all kinds of stuff. But it's that kind of stuff's a battle.
Interesting. Yeah. Just so amazing. I'm floored. Okay, so you do the long fermentation, and then what's the aging process behind this wine? Are you
usually once used, we'll take one of our oak barrels from our Cab program and transfer it over to the Cab Franc program. And then we'll do about 20 months on lees. Don't touch it, don't rack it. Just let it settle.
Yeah. And what does, not doing batonnage, what does allowing it to rest on the lees but not stirring it, what does that add to the wine?
Texture and freshness, kind of keeps it fresh. Yeah.
But I guess not overpowering. If you're stirring it, it can get too heavy and rich in the mouthfeel.
You can, if you stir, you can introduce a lot of reductivity. Stirring is again, it's one of those things where you stir to try and fix something that you think is missing. In my mind, everything you do once you press it off and put it in barrel is trying to maybe fix an issue with the wine. And so we've gotten to the point where most of our wines go in a barrel and they hang out until it's time to bottle them. And then we bring them in really gently and rack them off the lees and bottle them. And
Yeah.
that's worked really, really well for us. It keeps like a lot of the integrity and low dissolve oxygen in the wine. So they age very nicely without having to be like overly tannic or kind of brutal in that way.
Mhm.
And you know, in my philosophy, like the less you're doing with the wine, the better job you're doing. That, you know, all the work that you do is fixing issues. So if you don't have a lot of issues, then you're doing great.
Yeah. Are you seeing more appreciation for Cab Franc,
Oh yeah.
compared to its Bordeaux brethren?
Yes. Yeah. Cab Franc is very hot, and akin to the Albarino, we've really gained a reputation as one of the premier Cab Franc producers in the States. Um, I think it's a lot has to do with where we work. We're in this really great space where, you know, I've seen a lot of like the Santa Ynez Cab Francs that can be very like weedy and grassy, and a lot of like your Napa Sonoma Cab Francs are kind of Cab Franc in name only, and they don't really like express that frankiness. And we're kind of in the sweet spot where we can have like the structure and flavor traditional to Cab Franc, but with this particular sheen on it.
Yeah, it feels like the Santa Ynez Cab Francs are all Happy Canyon, which is, getting into those, 90, 100-degree temperature days with how inland they are.
Yeah.
So this is, Santa Cruz Mountains is a very unique
Mhm.
structural place in terms of its geography. I imagine kind of similar to Salinas Valley, but obviously not with the wind tunnel blowing through.
Yeah, I mean, Santa Cruz Mountains in many ways is a vortex, and it's a place where even from a wine growing perspective, you just forget rules. And some things work and some things don't. And Bates Ranch works, and that kind of speaks to the comment being a very atypical Cab Franc. It's a beautiful wine. It is atypical. I haven't seen anything like it. And it's just taken some years of exploration to kind of find this idea of the wine. But it's, I mean, proof's in the pudding. So you kind of
Yeah.
go with it.
No, it's. I get all the attack and mid palate flavors of a Chenin,
Yeah.
but none of that like green finish of a Chenin on it, which is what's amazing about it. And it doesn't have that Paso Robles lushness and kind of one note that hot climate picked in October, but it's still 92 degrees out in October that you find in Paso Robles. It's a real anomaly, but in the most positive way.
Yeah, I mean, I've got another Cab Franc in barrel that I've picked up, and I've taken essentially the whole vineyard on, because it's another one that's just like might be Ravenel, but it's in San Benito County, and yeah, that's our fermentation, our aging. We don't, we're just very kind of straight ahead throwing fastballs, not doing a whole lot to it. It's just hitting those, knowing how to pick the vineyards, being attentive, hitting those pick times, and then running nice solid fermentations, and knowing how to find the right variety and place match, and the wines come out killer. And yeah.
And so I have to ask, how did you pick up this sort of second sense that you have in the vineyards? Because it sounds like so much of what you're doing is going to the vineyards, visiting them, tasting the grapes, knowing when to pick them based on climates and whatnot. How does one learn that?
I have no idea. It's certainly not something I learned from anyone I work for. It's not, it's not something I picked up from a book. And what I found is there's just people that have it and people that don't. And as a winemaker, you can look at someone's wines and be like, either you get it or you don't. And it's astounding to see winemakers who are successful, where you taste their wines and you're just like, there's no foundation here. This is all, it's a very Thomas Kincaid art sort of idea.
Just reproduction, follow the giant binder that you have, add
Yeah,
in X, add in Y, add in Z, wait
yeah,
this long, and boom, you're ready to go.
yeah. But it's, it is just a certain ability to adapt to environment. I mean, for me, I think a lot of it is kind of twofold. I have like the initial trauma of starting this business and not selling really well and really struggling.
Mhm.
So I don't ever want to do that again.
Right.
And so I try really hard. And then the second is that I didn't come to wine, from an aspirational or like from a sommelier perspective. I've always just been in cellars. And so, like I said, I'm sort of agnostic in terms of styles and varieties. And I'm not trying to make this thing, the other thing. I'm not trying to emulate one thing or the other. Like I'll find touchstones and interesting kind of threads to follow, but any emulation or any like association is purely by accident.
Mhm.
So you just kind of you respond to what's there, and hopefully you see that clearly, and that's like the foundation of good winemaking is being able to see what's there.
Yeah. David had asked about the ageability of this wine. This is a 2019. What I find interesting is, I mean, that's 3 years, still relatively young, but to me, it does not taste like a young wine. It feels like it's, older than it actually is. But what sort of ageability do you think this and really all of your wines have?
It feels older than it actually is in terms of like the melons, the tannins.
Just the softness. I think some of the flavors are a little bit on the drier side. It's not as fruit forward, not as bombastic or kind of aggressive. It just has a lived in feel to it.
Yeah, and that has to do more with that longer, cooler fermentation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's kind of where you get those drier flavors from. Yeah, and I think that our wines typically over 5 to 10 years, kind of when they're at that structure. We have some wines that are more like 20, 25-year wines, but it will adapt and evolve over 5 to 10 years for sure. And you will have periods where it'll feel a little bit more aged, and you'll have periods where it will feel younger and fresher.
Nice. Do you have a library of your wines where you're pulling them out and tasting them year in and year out to, kind of determine whether they're still active or maybe hitting their peak?
You're assuming a level of organization and intent that I don't have.
Well, everything else you've told me with spreadsheets and whatnot sounded so organized that I assume, maybe I assume wrong.
That I taste wines periodically to get an idea of like what the wine does. And yeah, I maintain a library. The 15 Bates is really nice right now. 19 is a little bit of a warmer, lower acid year comparatively, a little softer. So I don't know that it'll age as well as the 18 or the 20. But I you've easily got another 5 to 8 years in that one for sure.
Yeah. Well, probably not, because I imagine most people are opening it up tonight or will be in the next week to drink through it. But that's why you're going to order more from Ian. That's what it's all about. Awesome. As we let's talk about the food pairings with this one. Cab Franc, always an interesting wine to try to pair with food.
Yeah, I've got to rock and roll pretty shortly, so it's
okay. Yeah, we'll wrap this up soon.
Yeah, meats with sauces, often. Yeah, there's often good things like cured meats, things that have a little funkiness, some peppers to it.
Yeah,
do very well.
I could see some duck, some like Breciola would be fantastic with this, like a smoked beef. Even something lighter like duck. I mean, this does have kind of a similar mouthfeel to a Pinot Noir, that same acid structure to it. So I could see duck being really nice with this. Nice. So what is the future of iBrand and family? Like, where do you see the winery going in the next 5 to 10 years? What do you want to expand on? What do you want to experiment with? What's in bottle that you're excited about?
I've been thinking about that a lot lately. That I've spent kind of, we start out with no money and start out so small, and I spent so many years kind of climbing this hill.
Yeah.
Um,
Like a Kate Bush song.
like a Kate Bush song. Yes, that's what I was thinking. And
Make a deal with God.
right, I finally got to the point where I'm coming for air, and I'm doing a lot of like rounding out the staff and my team to make it operate kind of more consistently and smoothly, to give me the headspace to move into the next phase. And there are some things that are driven by market pressures. There's been really, especially the last 2 to 3 years, really phenomenal demand for the kind of Albarino and Paysan wines that I'm having to meet. I'm driven by a devotion to this area and wanting to make it into kind of the most beautiful iteration of itself, and influence that. And I'm motivated by kind of longevity and legacy, in terms of partially what kind of area do I leave, but also how to take this thing that I've grown from a seed and give it staying power. I've watched too many wineries of our ilk come up, hit some of the heights that we've hit, and then as the principal ages or loses interest or does something else, sort of dissipate.
Right.
Like the coupe examples are kind of great examples, and so I'm looking at a lot of models of ones that have been successful and find that longevity without selling out to a corporation.
Right.
And
Right.
how to do that and put something in place for the benefit of our employees and my kids and kind of that whole piece. And that's not an easy one to solve.
No.
I think
And it also might be something that changes in 5 years.
Sure, yeah, but I think the reason that a lot of wines of our ilk kind of have gone through that like life pattern, is because it's not an answer that's readily out in front of you. And so I'm doing a lot of thinking about that, of how to kind of navigate those waters.
So I know you're thinking about it, but like right now, if you could write your own legacy, what would it be? Would it be, he's somebody who made Salinas great again? Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Is it somebody who, like, I worked with so many interesting, unique varietals that I brought those up? Is it I, made the same great wine year in and year out and was so consistent that people loved it? Like, what would your dream legacy be?
I think first and foremost, to have in the wine world a strong idea of what Salinas, San Benito counties are in terms of growing regions, in terms of flavors, and to have like a particular flavor profile group of wines that are sought after and high quality, that are seen in New York City or seen in Japan, and have like that Monterey, the idea of Monterey.
Yeah.
I think that's important for like the ethical development of the region, that if you're doing a lot of commodity farming, you're essentially soil mining, and
Right.
it's
You have to have that top shelf that sort of lifts up everybody else.
yeah, and so a lot of the work that I'm doing, and the reason it's so diverse, is to try and plant a lot of flags to help people to steer by. And what we've done with Albarino is kind of a perfect example. And at some point, I already know that like Shide's getting to Albarino and that sort of thing. And at some point, some larger winery is going to take up that mantle, and even if what they produce is 80% of what ours is, hopefully, because 80% of what I think is a very good example, they are kind of pursuing a proper iteration of Monterey County Albarino, rather than picking at 26 bricks and watering it back and making it silly and blousy.
Yeah, I was gonna say you have something, and I'm not denigrating them, but like a Pierce Ranch where they're sourcing most of their fruit from the Lockwood kind of southern Monterey area and
Sure.
making more warmer weather versions of those wines.
Yeah, I mean, the latest vintages of the Paysan Albarino is quite good.
Okay.
It's taken a little while for the vineyard to kind of hit of age and to dial the water back to where it's where they understand it. I worked with them for many years, and it just took a long time to understand that terroir. But yeah, it's the Albarino is not their greatest grape. You know, they're much better in the Torrigas, Gracianos, Arentos,
Right.
those warmer climate stuff. Yes. Yeah. So getting the right grapes in the right places in the right styles, and then having that seen by the world, so where there is a idea of Monterey, that would be a legacy I would really love to have.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very cool. So last question, promise, is if folks want to taste your other wines, come up and visit,
Sure.
buy wines, what is the best way to get a hold of you, make purchases, come visit?
So we have a tasting room in Carmel Valley, 19 East Carmel Valley Road. We have a website which is desperate need of updating. That's a project for the summer. It's ibrandwinery.com. And then the email hello@ibrandwinery.com will get you in touch with us. And you can get a list of what we have currently. We have a club that releases 3 times a year that, if you want all the interesting bits and pieces, that's the best way to do it. But we're low key. So we'd love to have you come visit. This area is, I'm slightly biased. It's one of the most beautiful in the world. And so a little wine tasting, a little beach time, a little Big Sur, some good food, some good wine, not bad for a weekend.
Absolutely. All right. I have one more question, only because it's right at my wheelhouse. What are some of those bits and pieces that you've got that, we haven't tasted, but people might be interested in?
I mean, we do a barrel aged skin contact version of the Albarino. We do a Gamay, Arnase out of San Benito County. We have 3 different single vineyard Cab Sauves, all, one off of the top of Montebello, old vines out of Carmel Valley, old vines out of Bates Ranch. We've really spent time just collecting the best pieces of this area and trying to show them the best light.
Picking up strays and turning them into show dogs, basically.
So, well, I guess that's one way to look at it. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of been the practice, seeing the diamonds within the coal.
Awesome. Well, Ian, I know you've got to run, but this has been illuminating. Your wines are absolutely stunning and fantastic. I think everybody enjoyed them. We've got, yes, applause all the way around. So thank you so much for being here. This was great. And again, if anybody wants to get a hold of more of Ian's wines, ibrandwinery.com, which will be updated this summer, or you can certainly get in touch with me. We'll have to wait on the Melon de Bourgogne until the fall when the new one's going to be released. But
Sure.
we can we can do futures on that. That's fun. So perfect.
Really appreciate your time, guys. Thanks so much for
absolutely. All right. Thank you so much for being here, Ian. You take care.
Have a good evening. Bye.
All right, you too. Bye now. All right, everybody, you can unmute yourself if you want, and we can chat, or you can leave.
No, I want to chat.
Okay.
Okay, I was, drinking the Cab Franc and thinking it tasted really young. And
interesting.
Yeah, and so I'm drinking it and thinking, but as it opened up, I kind of got what you were talking about. But I thought 5 years from now, this wine would be really nice. But I didn't like it right now.
Oh, see, I'm because I'm so used
until
to
it opened up. Once it opened up, I was good.
Yeah, I'm so used to the Paso Robles style of Cab Franc, where it's so lush and kind of big and like cabbage-ace, that to me having that leaner style just it felt like something completely different.
kind of refreshing in that sense.
Yeah, just so different. And I'm like, that was, to me, this was one of the most educational tastings I've been through, because I always thought of Santa Lucia Highlands, Salinas Valley, in very kind of desolatory terms. But it sounds like there's some really interesting growing patterns there, and some, unique climate structures that can be creating some interesting wines.
Chris, we missed, and I apologize for coming in late, but how did you find this winery, and when did you start buying from them?
So I had a distributor who came through back when I had my shop, and it must have been 2012 or 2013, who had Ian's wines. And at that point, there were so few domestic Albarinos out there, especially at the price points that he was offering his wines at, that I was super intrigued by them. And then the Petit Paysan, I always have a love of Rhone varietals and Rhone blends. So that one kind of was right up my alley. So I remember bringing those wines in, and they did well at the shop. And then I had kind of, I'd seen Ian pop up. He was named, I think it was the 2018 Winemaker of the Year in California by the California State wine competition. And I'd seen his name pop up here and there. And then oddly enough, it was Allison who had gone up to that tasting that brought us Eden Rift in January. And Ian poured, because he sources a lot of wines from San Benito County up there, sources his grapes from San Benito County. So she mentioned, that Ian would be one who would be interesting to work with. So I reached out to him, and he was open to it. So, yeah.
It sounds like you're saying San Bernardino, but I know you're not. San
Benito. Sorry.
We're like San Bernardino
drinking.
County. Where's that wine area? It's not an appellation I'm familiar with.
No, San Benito is just east of Monterey, kind of right between, I can't remember the two ranges, but kind of within Pinnacles National Park and whatnot. But you have the Cienega Valley where Eden Rift is located. Ken Volk used to source a lot of his, what he called his heirloom varietals, his forgotten grapes, from vineyards in San Benito. So it's kind of a very, in California terms, a more ancient growing area. And it's a very, very cool climate area in there, kind of right on the San Andreas fault line. So there's a lot of granite and schist and just really unique soils, and high elevation and very steep, these V-shaped valleys from the glacial contact, and the plates matching. So you have a lot of real steep hills, but it's still, as the proprietor of Eden Rift kept mentioning, they're only about 20, I think they're less than 25 miles, due west from the coast. It's kind of an amazing little area.